Everybody. As we wrap up May, we wrap up our Coffee with a County Forester with Sam Shinesky. I'd like to welcome you all. I think we're in week 10 of Coffee with a County Forester. It's been really fun to go through and meet all the different county foresters. And Sam is in Windham County. And so what I ask is that you all mute yourselves, and that helps eliminate background noise. And if you have questions, you type them in the chat box and I'll relay them to Sam and he can answer them. It kind of keeps everything flowing pretty well. And Vermont Coverts and Vermont Woodlands Association welcomes you to this program. And I'm actually just going to turn it over to Sam and let him tell us a little bit about himself and about what he does and loves about being a county forester for Windham County.
All right, thank you. This is interesting to say the least, but I guess we're all getting used to this. Probably nobody here is on their first Zoom ever. We've all gotten to be some semi-pros. So I'm Sam Shinesky. I'm the Windham County Forester. Little background about me, I guess, is I grew up working for my dad in his tree nursery and landscaping business, and coincidentally, he went to college at Michigan State and was there for forestry at the same time Jim White, the previous Bennington County forester there. So they knew each other long before I existed. And then it was fun to meet Jim again. And when I was becoming a young forestry professional. So I grew up doing that sort of work. Went to college at University of Maine for Parks and Recreation Management, actually. And then after that, got a job working at Merck Forest in Rupert, Vermont as their forest manager. That's a roughly 3,200 acre forest with a couple 100-acre farm, and met my wife there. She was the farm manager and I was the forest manager. So we ended up meeting and yada, 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 falling in love. And then we both went back school, and I went to grad school for forestry, and speeding ahead, got the job working for Forest and Parks in 2006 as a first year assistant county forester. I worked out of Windsor and Windham counties when John Boughton was the Windsor County forester and Bill Gunther was the Windham County forester. So had some good role models there. Pretty intimidating to meet two folks like that. They're just so knowledgeable, and thinking, I don't know how I could ever get to that level. You know, I mean, they're just really smart foresters and really good role models. And so I worked as kind of the dual Southern Windsor, Windham County forester for many years until Bill recently retired a year and a half ago, I guess now, and then transitioned to Windham County, solely covering Windham County, which is nice because I live in Guilford, and driving up to Springfield every day was getting old. So it's a great state to work in, as you're all aware, and a wonderful organization where we have a lot of flexibility. So my main part of my job is to administer the current use program, but we also have just all kinds of opportunities to work with non-forest landowners, just folks interested in trees and the environment and working in the environment. I'm a kind of a hobby exploded sugar maker. So I sugar enough to make 120 gallons or so a year. And I also love running a chainsaw and teaching folks safe and efficient felling techniques. So I'm one of our state chainsaw certifiers. And you know, I really relate well to folks that like to work with their land and try to stay in tune with what's going on. What else? A lot of hobbies. Gotten into hunting and fishing, and turning bowls on a spring pole lathe, which I made from scratch. It's actually like a bungee cord that goes down through a whole setup you make out of wood and pump a pedal with your foot, and then you have to figure out how to make the tools. So you get to figure out how to be a blacksmith and pound some cutting tools out of drill rod and stuff like that. If I get a hobby, I kind of go after it 110%. So that's what I'm doing when I can get out of the house and I'm not at work and I'm not watching kids. So yeah, I guess that's a quick oversight of a little bit of me. Windham County, as my predecessor, Sir Bill Gunther, always used to say, is the timber capital of Vermont. I did watch Jared Nunnery, the Orleans County Forester's coffee talk with Lisa suggested to watch his, and he was ranting and raving about how great Orleans County was. I thought, give me a break. We're in such a better county in Windham County. It's the timber capital. We're talking forestry. So there is a lot of data out there, that FIA, Forest Inventory Analysis data that the Forest Service collects, that shows that Windham County is the timber capital. It has the most standing volume of hardwood and softwood trees in Vermont, and we regularly rank either the top county or the top 3 counties of saw log production, usually anywhere from 17 million board feet to 25 million board feet. We do host the state's 2 largest sawmills. We're just really in a nice niche. We have a little bit of everything. I know Jared said that, but we actually do have a little bit of everything, except his cedar. We don't have cedar, but you know, we have the Connecticut River, the Green Mountains, Deerfield River, skiing, hiking, sugaring, biking, hunting, arts and crafts. There's depending on the numbers, there's anywhere from 86 to 93% of Windham County is forested. And it's one of the most forested counties in the state. We have access to cities, if you like that sort of thing. Not really my thing, but you know, it is a draw for some people. It's an interesting range of population. So Brattleboro, our highest populated town, is 12,000 folks, and Somerset is way up there with 3 people. So it's just fun to kind of look up those stats for this sort of get together. And yeah, let's see what else. I took some notes here. So we have a lot going on. Are there any questions or anything people want to talk about yet? Or I can just, like all of us county foresters, we can kind of blabber on and about whatever we feel like, but I'd rather answer questions or get on a. Yep.
There's not any questions yet.
Okay.
Oh, someone wrote, can you tell us a little bit about ash trees?
All right. Well, so as some of you know, we do have emerald ash borer in the state in certain areas. You'll hear this reference to vtinvasives.org a lot. If you've watched any of the other coffee chats with county foresters, it's referenced and it's a great resource. I'm gonna take the chat off because it's a little distracting. Sorry. So we do have emerald ash borer in Windham County, and we're trying to urge folks to go to vtinvasives.org and look at the recommendations of slowing the spread. If you're not familiar with emerald ash borer, it's a little teeny, kind of pretty insect that's green colored, can be confused with a tiger beetle. Oftentimes I get calls saying I found emerald ash borer, and I go look at it and it's a tiger beetle, it's got a tiger beetle has a head and a thorax, I guess it's called, a neck and a body. So it's a very distinct difference, whereas emerald ash borer is a buprestrid that is just a single body, and there will be a link on vtinvasives.org that shows the lookalikes. Right now they're about to start their flight season. I think June 1st, the morning of June 1st, all the EAB that exist, they read the book, you know, so they're like, okay, we can't fly quite yet. They get ready, and then June 1st, they're moving. So they're gonna have their flight season from June 1st to roughly September 30th. So this is an important time to follow the guidelines posted on our website there, not to move firewood, not to move logs unless they're properly treated and they're going to a properly certified receiving facility. there's a lot of research going on out there. This is one of those many things that we don't fully understand, and we won't fully understand for a long, long time. So I try to urge folks to steer away from the kind of a potential knee-jerk reaction, which is there's emerald ash borer in the state. It kills ash trees. I need to go cut my ash trees. That, you know, I think that's not a good knee-jerk reaction. That's more of a mining the resource kind of approach, and we want to keep ash around as long as we possibly can. So there are suggestions on how to, for some sentinel trees, maybe in town squares. There are some ways to treat ash trees with pesticide. There's the idea that, you know, you can reduce the amount of phloem, or the amount of tissue that emerald ash borer feeds on, by reducing the amount of mature ash in your forest when in combination with other recommendations in your forest management plan. Again, not just doing management to mine a resource, but to actually better the forest and maybe spread out the ash density enough so that we kind of reduce the spread in that way. Again, many more specifics on that in vtinvasives.org. Ash trees are dioecious, so they have female and male trees. So another important thing to do right around now is to identify which trees are males and which trees are females, and the females will have seeds. So if you are deciding which trees you want to save versus harvest for saw timber or firewood, that's an important consideration. And let's see, yeah, so a lot of information on it. It's here. We'll continue to find it. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of good forest health protection folks that are working on and following up with potential biocontrols and other methods. I think there's a big seed bank that's being stored in some vault in Colorado, where the Forest Service stores seeds for a lot of these species that we're afraid we can or will lose. So yeah, that's kind of a scattered it in a nutshell. But
it's great to know that, you know, we want to keep ash as part of the landscape, and, you know, we don't want to rush out and take them all. And I think that's really an important message. But you know, people get so scared and it rightfully, you know, concerned. But, you know, let's look at it in a thoughtful way as we enter our forest. So I think that's an important point. Thanks, Sam. Yeah. Tracy wants to know if you can talk about the value of sumac, elderberry, alders, viburnum, and other woody plants and shrubs as part of the whole system and as habitat.
Yeah, so those tend to be sumac, elderberry, alder. I mean, I think of those as lower shrubby type of species that serve a very important role in our ecosystem, in anywhere from river and bank stabilization to cover for wildlife to soft mast food source for wildlife. So yeah, I mean, there's, I guess the one of the points from that I'm getting through that question is there's more important species than just the big trees that we see. You know, we look at it, we go in the forest, and it's easy to look at huge sentinel, beautiful mature forest trees, but there's real benefit to these lower shrubby native trees, and that'll get me on the stretch of native versus invasive. We do have a lot of invasive species in Windham County, probably because of our southerly location, the Connecticut River, our soils. There's just a lot of issues with invasive plants, so they can easily edge out those native shrubs. You know, the alders, the elderberries, the sumacs, and that's something to be aware of and to try, educate yourself on, and try to not let it get to a point where it's out of control to the extent where it's a huge project to get control of the invasive plants and make way for native plants. It's one of those things. It's like, well, we can notice I have one invasive plant here, I have one there, I'm not going to deal with it, it's not a big deal. And then it's just human nature and the way these populations grow that you look sideways for a second and boom, you've got a huge population and a huge project. So it's early detection, early treatment sort of thing that will preserve and enhance native shrub habitat.
That sounds great. Another resource that people could look at is Foresters or Forest for the Birds. When you're thinking about bird habitat, you kind of look at 3 levels, sort of what's on the ground, what's in the mid-story, which are those shrubs that you're kind of talking about, and what's in the overstory. So that's a great place. Wildlife. And we've also done, if you go to our YouTube channel, some wildlife talks that talk about how habitat is important for wildlife as well. So that is another resource that you can go to. I have a question from Emily. And she wants to know, she lives in the middle of Rutland City, so same as if they lived in the middle of Brattleboro. What can they do to help the cause or issue of forestry, since they don't really own any, but what kind of influence and how can they access it?
Oh, there's a lot of opportunities to access it in Vermont. You're in luck. I mean, there's town forests, there's state forests, there's neighbors. I mean, if their land's not posted, technically it's okay if you go walk other people's lands. I always recommend getting in touch with those folks just to let them know that you're just somebody that wants to go walk in the woods. But there's a lot of opportunity to access forests and forestry in Vermont. So yeah, just because you live in a city, plus there's urban and community forestry programs that are alive and well in Vermont. And I think Rutland is actually one of the designated tree cities USA, which has an urban forest management plan and process for identifying the trees in the city and what they are, where plantings can happen. And so there's a lot of access there. Speaking back about Windham County, we have Windham Regional Woodlands Association, which is a great source for the region for a woodland. It used to be called Woodland Owners Association, but we didn't want to give the idea that people that don't own woodlands aren't invited, because they always are. So the name was changed to Windham Regional Woodlands Association. And we have, I believe it's the longest running association of that type in the state. It'll be 70 years old next year. And it started as a woods cooperative where they actually bought a rail car to you could bring, if you were part of the organization, you could bring your logs to the rail car and put it together and ship it off for, to sell the logs. Much easier for a few landowners to fill a rail car with logs than one. So those sort of groups, Vermont Woodlands Association, Coverts, I mean, there's no distinction really for membership. You just need to be interested in forests and forestry and want to learn more. So yeah, living in Rutland is just as good as living in Brattleboro, and you have access to a lot of forestry around you.
Great, thanks. Alicia would like to know, how big a problem is hemlock woolly adelgid in Windham County?
It's pretty prevalent. This is the first county it was found in. We have Jim Esden as our forest protection specialist that really works with hemlock woolly adelgid. He monitors some specific locations in the county that he's found hemlock woolly adelgid. I forget when the initial find was. It was, Peter, where are you? Hold up your fingers or something. Was it 10 years, 15? Oh, not way, 5, 10, 15? Something like that. But anyway.
It's probably more like 20 or more at this point, because
no, really?
Yeah, it was a few years before I started for VLT, and I've been working for them for 20 years. So
Okay.
a long.
So
We haven't.
so there's yeah. So there's follow-up research with biocontrol, and just like emerald ash borer and a lot of these other invasive pests and plants, we're still learning more, you know. So 20 years has gone by and we still don't know, you know, we don't have the magic answer as to how to deal with hemlock woolly adelgid, but there are some suggested silvicultural treatments that may work, that could involve less heavy of a thinning, but actually thinning around trees that are affected by hemlock woolly adelgid to give them a little bit of better airflow and separate them from other hemlock trees. I've heard of that one recently. There's the biocontrol that they're releasing some Laricobius beetles they feed on hemlock woolly adelgid. I believe they're a native insect from the western U.S. But so there's things going on. Luckily, we have had, besides this past winter, before that we had a few really cold winters in a row, and that's knocked the population back. But like other invasive pests, we see a lot of times it's a combination of stressors that will actually kill the trees. So it's hard to go find a hemlock tree in Windham County that you can look at and say, this tree was healthy 20 years ago and it's had no other abiotic or biotic stressors except for hemlock woolly adelgid, and now it's dead because of that. So, I mean, that's kind of the long way of saying that's good news, you know, that we're not seeing a mass mortality at this point from hemlock woolly adelgid.
All righty, thanks. Let me ask you a question. Do you have a favorite tree? What is it and why?
Well, I used to have a favorite tree. It was sugar maple, which is kind of boring because, you know, we're in Vermont. That's the state tree. I'm a sugar maker. I love the syrup. I'm a forester. I love maple boards. They're great. Even capped maple boards, you know, they don't get the fair value that I think they should, because it's just, those boards tell a story. So I'm interested in wood products that tell a story, not just, you know, like the general, like buying logs in China right now because they want really white wood or they want really red wood because that's what consumer demand is. I like wood that has a story. So, you know, I've built a dresser for my wife out of cherry that I cut when I was in grad school, and it has knots in it. And a guy that is a furniture maker that saw that is like, oh, you really don't mind the defects, do you? And I said, no, it's cool. You know, it kind of tells a story. It's about that tree. So I'd say maple. My second runner-up is definitely yellow birch, just because of it's always a prolific cedar. It's a beautiful tree, a golden flaky bark. It can really live in shade, mid shade, and no shade conditions. And unlike the other birches, it can live to be really old. You know, I've been up on Mount Equinox in Manchester with Kyle Mason, was Bennington, now Rutland County Forester, years ago, and we were looking at some old growth yellow birch. It's just beautiful, but it doesn't look like yellow birch at all. It's just it's an ancient looking thing. And so those trees are 300 to 400 years old. No other birch tree can live that long. I mean, most other birches, once they get kind of 80, they're elderly. And I actually listened to Jared's talk the other day, and I remembered that that some neotropical migratory birds like warblers would prefer yellow birch, but I forgot the fact that he mentioned that one of the main reasons is that the petiole is such a short petiole that those leaves are really close to branches, so the bird doesn't have to do some sort of, you know, flight, you know, like a hummingbird or something, hover over the leaves to feed off of insects on them like they would on a maple. So it's just for that reason, maple and yellow birch. Maple birch.
Nice. All right, well, tell me what your thoughts are with the changes with climate change. You know, what are we thinking might happen to our forests, and what are we doing to anticipate that?
So yeah, that's a huge topic, and on the forefront of more and more folks' minds. We are, as a state, we're doing quite a bit. We're doing as much as we can. I think at this point, we've actually hired a climate forester, Ali Kasiba, who's really bright, and she's a great resource for climate change in Vermont in general. The state has put out a bunch of publications and has links to publications on our website, fpr.vermont.gov. Publications such as the Vermont Forest Carbon Assessment, creating and maintaining resilient forests in Vermont, and adapting to forest climate change. So there's a few key messages I think I like to focus on is the resilience of our forests. They are very resilient, but we've impacted them. So we've impacted them with invasive plants mainly and development. So we can turn to county and town planning boards and focus thoughtful expansion of the population of development versus just sort of, I bought my 100 acres and it has a really nice peak on it, so I'm going to put in my 3-mile driveway and put my house up on the peak and not really think about how that may affect wildlife and other species that really need that interior forest and the resiliency of those forests. So I would say if we didn't exist, then we wouldn't have brought those invasive plants along. And I think forests are inherently strong and resilient and can deal with the blows. But at this point, we've created some problems that we really can and should address, and one is reducing and controlling invasive plants so that we can enhance native plant growth, the ability for native plants to grow, and we also have issues such as high densities of deer in Windham County. So deer browse on native plants is another thing that we can address through hunting or fencing, fencing's expensive, but there are management options that we can follow and actually help our forests stay resilient or get back to the resilient state they were in. We have talked about enrichment plantings, where the thought is eventually, oak. In Windham County, we do have quite a few oak species, but there's a lot more in, say, Connecticut. So those species are slowly going to be migrating north over the next couple of centuries. And we can do enrichment plantings where we either plant oak in openings that are having a hard time regenerating, putting a little tree tube or fencing around those oaks to protect them from deer. We also talk about carbon sequestration versus carbon storage. Both are very important concepts and go together, like a hand in a glove. That it's really, one is not the better, in my opinion, one is not the better topic to focus on. Young, vibrant trees sequester carbon, meaning they take in carbon and they start to store it. But old and mature trees that have been on the landscape for decades or centuries store a lot of carbon. So we have to look at the interaction and the way those concepts work together. I have been working with a group with Peter Van Loon and others with the Vermont Land Trust on, what did we call that thing? I wrote it down so I didn't. The Family Forest Carbon Program, which is a grant program designed at, it's between American Forest Foundation and the Nature Conservancy to bring carbon incentives to small landowners who are shut out of the current carbon markets. Right now, carbon markets are meant for large tracts of land, like 5,000 acres is kind of a minimum. So there are other efforts in the state trying to build carbon market kind of cooperatives where you get a bunch of landowners together to kind of total 5,000 or more acres to then actually be eligible to sell carbon credits. But this program is based on basically doing practices on your forest that can enhance the carbon storage and carbon sequestration. And there's a small grant available. So VLT and some other land trusts in Massachusetts are working together to kind of figure out a few test properties that they will use these practices on, and it's still in the development stages, but some of the practices that we've kind of focused on to enhance carbon storage and sequestration are things like reforestation, planting fields that maybe are coming up to invasive plants. They're not used agriculturally or as open grassland, say, for bird habitat. So reforestation, establishing reserves, and protecting regeneration from herbivory. So in this pilot program, there will be some funding for the few parcels that are going to be involved in it in the beginning stages to try some of these approaches and enhance carbon sequestration and storage on their properties. So that's one thing that's going on. There's a lot more. I mean, again, a web search would kind of turn you on to a lot of different things in the state. Interestingly enough, in Guilford, before the pandemic hit, we had a project scheduled with a group out of New Hampshire that's a jet services company who feel really guilty about their carbon emissions because they fly people like to Montana from New Hampshire for their getaways or for their business trips, or I probably shouldn't even say that because I'm not exactly sure what their services are, but they're flying people and they're emitting a lot of carbon. So they're being proactive and they want to do planting projects. Just so happens on the Green River in Guilford, there's a parcel that has been restored. It was for decades just a junk heap of the family just would basically say, yeah, you want to come park your bus here? Give us $50, we'll take care of your bus for you. Well, what they did was made a junkyard that was just awful. So through the town and other monies, other nonprofit help, they've cleaned that area up, and they want to plant the riparian area to native vegetation like disease-resistant elms and some of the shrubs, like alder, sumac. So that's a way to kind of enhance the health of that riparian area and give back to the environment and store more carbon and sequester carbon.
Cool. That's a lot of neat stuff going on. So thanks for sharing. Tim wants to know about Asian longhorn beetle. Have they shown up in Vermont? And if so, where are they?
They have not. The only place they've shown up are on the little ID cards that I have in my office. And luckily, that'll stay that way. We owe a huge thanks to the city of Worcester, Massachusetts. They've gone through heck and back, by spending millions, if not billions of dollars, removing all of the host trees for Asian longhorn beetle and doing delineation surveys regularly. I mean, hiring climbers that would climb every tree that was a host tree and look. I mean, just an enormous expense. And last I've heard, they've not found any new detections in the outskirts, and definitely not in the center of the city of Worcester. So no offense to Worcester, I don't go visit Worcester because I went through there once and I got lost. It was terrifying, but they have done a great job at containing their Asian longhorn beetle outbreak. And long answer to a short question, no, not that I know of. We don't have it in Vermont.
Great. Here's a question. I'll be interested to see how you answer because I don't know how much you've actually been able to get out in the field. What is your sense about the abundance of maple flowering and fruiting this year?
That's a good question because I haven't been able to get out in the field. I'm a stay-at-home dad who does paperwork and Zooms. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it has to do with the really light winter we had, or this past fall. I really don't know. Anybody else on this call have a better answer than that? That maybe is lucky enough to get out in the woods. What's that?
I've been out a fair bit, and I haven't seen much in the way of maple seed this year. 2 years ago, we had a tremendous seed, but this year, not really.
Okay. Yeah, actually, just speaking of neat things in maple, this year was the first year in 20 years that I've made fancy syrup, like super fancy syrup. When I drew it off the evaporator, it almost looked like water. And I'm looking at my hydrometer and the sheeting, and I'm checking the temperature, and I thought, this is like, something's wrong. It's the first boil of the year in mid-February, and it came off like the clearest, the least colored syrup I've made, and I don't know what that is from. You know, maybe the starches and sugar buildup from the previous growing season was really good. I mean, it was sweeter sap in the beginning of the year, which I usually don't see, and then reports throughout the state, which were consistent with my finds, was that throughout the season the sugar content wasn't very high at all. So maybe it was this little burst of high sugar content, which means short boil time and less caramelization and lighter syrup. But it was a cool observation. I was excited.
Very cool. Emily has an interesting question, and I hadn't heard this yet. She wants to know what you think of the idea of planting trees 6 feet apart along roads and town or city streets where you can do this to help with the COVID-19 pandemic social distancing.
Huh. When you started saying that, I was like, ooh, there's a good COVID joke in there, but she went right to it, so I can't even make that joke. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard of that. I think planting trees 6 feet apart, if they're indeed trees, wouldn't be a good idea because they need a lot more space than that once they mature. So you would actually be doing, you would probably have 50% more, potentially 50% mortality or less development per tree than you could have in an intended planting. I mean, you'd be basically mimicking slightly a natural process in the woods where they kind of grow up really close and sort each other out, and then the most vibrant, healthy trees eventually, once there's stem exclusion, they start to win the race and become the canopy trees. So I think probably with tree planting in general, 6 feet apart wouldn't be a great idea, but maybe crab apples or Christmas trees, something like that, planting them 6 feet apart and saying each person can only go to their dedicated tree. Interesting idea.
That far apart.
Yeah.
Well, there was some discussion in the chat box about the not seeing a lot of flowering in the maples, and just that last year was a big seed year, and so a little bit of discussion. Interesting how things change over time. Some years are good seed years, some years are good mast years. So your squirrel populations and your bear populations have great food going into the fall. So
and a lot of that stuff is site specific too. So I mean, we've had years where I thought it was a crummy mast year. I didn't really see many acorns, and then I talked to other folks in other counties or other parts of this county, and they say, well, I'm seeing the opposite. I'm seeing like killer mast year, acorns everywhere. So there's general trends annually for different trees and what they put out for seeds and fruit, etc. But a lot of that stuff can be site specific as well.
So Tim notes that he's seeing ash trees that have snapped off at about 15 feet off the ground he's thinking maybe from strong winds. Is this unusual? they're at a high elevation. So he's wondering if it's unusual or is it happening across the state?
I don't know if it's happening across the state. It does happen, not just with ash trees, with a lot of trees. Higher elevation trees are sometimes struggle more, depending on what kind of soil they're in and how their roots can take hold or not. So, when you get to really high elevations, the trees don't grow tall, and there's many reasons for that. Lack of sufficient nutrients and just evolution that if you grow really tall on this height of land, you're going to get blown over. So yeah, that's a tough question to answer without seeing the site and getting very site specific. We do know when ash die, they get really brittle really fast. So that's another warning that we tell folks about just with emerald ash borer. It's not just that a tree that's emerald ash borer killed is super brittle. It's the ash species in general is very brittle when it's dying and definitely dying and or dead. So those trees could have been on their way out or less sturdy than other surrounding trees, and then you get some massive wind event and they snap off. Just as a side note, if you are a do-it-yourselfer type that likes to run a chainsaw and fell trees and get your own firewood or cut some saw logs occasionally, you'll know that cutting dead ash is one of the most dangerous trees to cut, because that holding wood, dead trees, I always say don't trust a dead tree anyway, but ash trees are really there's just no strength in the holding wood on the hinge. So actually, that's a good plug for Northeast Woodland Training. If you haven't taken, if you haven't taken the game of logging, I highly, highly recommend it. I took it back in 1999 or 2000, and I've taught it to different staff members and interns throughout jobs I've had, and taken it a few different times just to refresh myself. And it's one of those things that you'll never hear anybody say, I took the game of logging and I regret it. You'll only hear people say good things about it. They have really awesome instructors. It's not it's not the machismo, it's a chainsaw, so it's going to be a bunch of grunting Neanderthals. It's just not that. It's not that way. It's really well done, and it's for everybody. Women, men, kids that are 18 or so, older. And I've done that class so many times. I've done it with folks that have never even picked up a chainsaw, and they're some of the best sawyers in the classes because they're on it, And then I've done it with people who have logged for 50 years and they're taking the class because they get a reduction in their liability insurance. That was a program. They don't do it now, but that was a program in the early 2000s, and it was a bunch of, I don't need this, you can't teach me anything. And then by the end, it's you pick up a few good tips that you carry on. So check it out. Northeast Woodland Training, game of logging.
A great plug for a great program. I'll let David Birdsall know you're plugging it there.
Yeah, tell Dave and John I plugged their organization.
Absolutely. Well, Covert sponsors those, and Vermont Family Forest does, a number of North Wood Stewardship Center all sponsor
and
game of logging classes.
Wyndham Regional Woodlands Association sponsors it too. So
right, which is great. So if I know they're going to be starting up again now that we're having some of the social distancing. It's actually a class you can social distance with, because the most you can have in the class is 10, and they may actually knock that back in order to meet those.
And who do you not want to get closer to 6 feet to anyway? Somebody with a chainsaw.
Very true. Very true. William had asked, we're going a little bit backwards with the 6 foot. Did you have any ideas of any columnar cultivars that might work at the 6 foot intervals?
Yeah, arborvitae is always a good option for 6 foot spacing if you are willing to fight off deer. Deer really like to chew on arborvitae, so that was one of the things. In the wintertime, we did growing up when I worked for my dad in his tree nursery and landscaping business was went around and fenced arborvitae like crazy. So deer didn't destroy people's arborvitae. But that is usually the first one that comes to mind. That's a columnar type of tree that you can plant that will you can kind of shape it. You can keep it columnar, or you can shape it into a hedge. Again, I kind of like the idea of a weeping crab or weeping, a small variety tree that's kind of pretty and provides a nice space to sit underneath. If we're going to do the social 6 feet thing, you can sit under your own crab apple tree. And then growing Christmas trees. Bill Schmidt's on here. He can tell us all about the right spacing and what to do with Christmas trees. But that's definitely any kind of Christmas tree variety for temporarily. You're not going to plant them 6 feet apart and let them go and then expect them to stay, pretty like the Christmas trees that are that you buy. So.
Right. There's a question a little bit about habitat management in the woods. You might defer this to a biologist. I don't know. So woodcock and grouse are basically gone from our now mature forest land. Do you recommend park-like setting cutting to restore young growth to bring back these birds? I have read that in Maine, 2 of the foresters who have written some of the major books on forestry are recommending 20-acre and 50-acre clear cuts.
There's a lot of research out there on grouse and woodcock habitat, and I don't know if I've ever seen any that says park-like cutting, but there is, they do benefit from different successional stages of forest. So early successional habitat that's brought on by group or patch or clear cut areas is one of the stages. Alder management for woodcock, so that's the same thing. Alder will grow in specific places, usually wetter soils. They like wet feet. And you can do strip cutting through the alder once it gets mature to keep some of the mature stuff, but regenerate the younger, smaller stems. So yeah, there's a lot of options you can do, and that kind of dovetails nicely with forest management as a whole. If we want to create a healthy, diverse, resilient system, a true uneven age system where you have small, medium, large, and huge kind of stratified canopy and age growth is one that's going to be more resilient to more changes in our environment, and it's also going to benefit wildlife. So yeah, I still kick up grouse and woodcock. They're still out there. There's areas where you may have just blowdowns in the forest that can regenerate to early successional species if it doesn't get taken over by invasive plants or heavily browsed by deer. So there's a Goulion, I think. Google that name. That's the kind of godfather.
Goulion,
the godfather of grouse management, and it kind of goes through the stages of cutting and acreages and timing, of how to cut where and when to enhance grouse habitat. But interesting enough, I had a woodcock come the closest to me I've ever had this year. I took up turkey hunting as a COVID activity, so I could get out of the house at 3:30 and get back while kids were getting out of bed. So I was sitting there one morning and I heard the painting, and it was really cool. I love hearing woodcocks paint, but this one came and kind of buzzed by me, flew about a foot in front of my head and landed about 3 feet away from me and just kind of picked with its long bill down in the mud, picking worms and bugs, and was there for probably 10 minutes and didn't know I was there or didn't care I was there. So kind of a cool encounter.
I love those encounters. Those are some of the best. Another resource you can use, and all of these guys, Sam included, will be able to go visit with landowners again one-on-one as the restrictions ease, and they'll do it within recommendations. So as a landowner, they can come visit you. The same is true for the habitat biologists at Fish and Wildlife. So depending on where you are, it could be Jackie Como, Andrea Shortsleeve, Travis Hart, Dave Adams, and they can also look at your land and sort of make some recommendations. If you're looking to encourage woodcock and grouse, where would a cut be good, and how big would it need to be? So those are some other resources as landowners that you can go to.
Yeah, they're
Coverts also
great
did a
folks to work with.
yeah, and we just recently did in our newsletter an article on woodcock. If anybody wants that, just go ahead and email me. I'll put my email in the chat box, and I'll send you a copy of our past newsletter with the woodcock article in it. Let's see. There's no other questions in the chat box, so I'm going to pick one of my questions to ask you. And can you tell a little bit about what AMPs are and why landowners should be concerned with them, and how they learn about them?
So AMPs stands for Acceptable Management Practices, and then the stuff underneath is for logging jobs, for water quality on logging jobs in Vermont. So properties enrolled in current use are required. It's mandatory to implement AMPs. And what that means is when you have a timber sale, there's disturbance to the forest, there's disturbance to woods roads, their creation of woods roads, and what AMPs are protections. Basically, as Jim White used to say, keep the roads out of the water and the water out of the roads. I like that one. I've heard kind of slow spread and sink the water too. So those are, the idea is, one of the AMPs is installing water bars on your skid roads. That's a way to push up material to keep water that's going to land from rain or from an uphill slope running down your skid road and running off and dispersing into the forest and sinking into the soil. It also suggests and gives recommendations for stream and river crossings, appropriate and inappropriate things to do, because we want to, as foresters and loggers and landowners, there's a lot of different things going on that are economically driven, wildlife driven, recreationally driven. But the last thing a good steward wants to do is impact the water quality in a negative way. And so that AMPs ensure that every protection possible is put in place. And that also includes seeding and mulching landings, seeding and mulching roads that are approaches and of stream crossings. It's just, if you look up our AMP manual, it was just redone, and it's a beautiful document, and it can be found on our fpr.vermont.gov website. And it gets a little bit specific. I don't know how many landowners want to read about what slope means, how many water bars spaced, how many feet, but you get the gist of the intention of it and why we have AMPs and why they're required.
Great. There's another question that popped up. Are you seeing increasing turnover in forest land buying and or selling?
Yes, I'd say it started increasing. What I noticed, it started increasing the turnover. Not too long after I started in 2007 or 8, it was like, I remember Bill Gunther saying he had one parcel that had something ridiculous, like 6 owners in the 10-year management plan cycle of that property, and it's happening a lot. I don't understand it. I don't understand the economics of it, because to me, if you own a property that's got enough acres to be in current use, that's like a win. Why would you ever sell it? I understand things come up and life happens, but yeah, there's a lot of turnover. Luckily for better, I think that most people that buy or transfer land that's in the current use program, they want to stay in the current use program. Unfortunately, just from human nature, usually it's because they hear that as a tax break and that's what they want. But then we get the chance to talk to them and walk their land and say, well, guess what? This tax break comes with requirement that you manage your forest land. You do some cutting, you do some stand improvement, you do wildlife habitat creation, you do other things that enhance the land, it's the forest resilience, the forest economy in Vermont. So it's great that people want to stay in the program.
So Sam, can I jump in there and say one of the words I really like to use for current use is tax equity.
Right.
Rather
than break, right.
Break or benefit, because it is an equity. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Kathleen. That's great. Well, we're rounding out at 10 o'clock. Sam, is there any last minute thoughts or something that you want to make sure you offer or share about your services or forestry or Windham County?
Just to recap, Windham County is the best county in Vermont. Don't forget it. Tell your friends, especially if they live in another county. So rub it in a little bit. I really appreciate you guys putting on these Zooms, and as everybody understands, it's kind of a weird but kind of neat new way to connect with folks. I do look forward to the day when you can get out in the woods and we don't have to have face masks on and be 6 feet apart and worry about that sort of thing. But as my mom always says, this too shall pass. So we're all doing the best we can, and the forests are there. Get out, enjoy them. If you have questions, contact me, contact any other resource professional. That's why we're in the jobs we are, because we love to answer questions, and more selfishly, I love to learn new things. I don't think I'll ever consider myself an expert in much of anything, but I do like to learn from others and share that knowledge when I can. So get out in the woods. Watch out for ticks. Treat your pants with permethrin and your shirt with permethrin. I know if you don't like chemicals, then do tick checks every day. You got to do those anyway, but I don't think that DEET or the natural remedies really work that well. I've tested most of them, and tell you, it's pretty satisfying to have a pair of pants on that have been treated in permethrin and watch a tick crawl up your leg and then croak half of its trip, just fall off your leg.
Well, great. That's a great way to finish. Be safe when you're out there, dress appropriately, bring water, but get out there, enjoy your woods, enjoy the things that Vermont has to offer. And I want to thank Kathleen with Vermont Woodlands Association and Vermont Coverts for being able to continue to bring these to you. We'll have another speaker again next Friday. We're trying to nail down who that's going to be, so watch for the emails that will have that in there.
Oh, Kathleen.
It's planned. We're going to have Keith Thompson with us next Friday morning.
Yeah.
Oh,
Keith,
great.
Yeah, Keith is the Private Lands Program Director, the person kind of at the top.
That's great. That's really great.
Lisa, is there a way I can look at the chats? Because somebody mentioned my sister in one of those chats. I was going to get back to her, but I don't know if I can get to those or not.
I don't know. I'll have to figure that out later.
Okay.
I get them, so I can send it to you, I think.
Yeah, send it to me. That'd be great.
All right, everybody. Well, check out the websites for Vermont Woodlands Association, Vermont Coverts, FPR. You can join VWA. You can donate to Vermont Coverts to make sure that we continue to have these opportunities for you. If you're already a member or a contributor, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone, please stay safe. And we will see, hopefully, all of you next week. All of these foresters have amazing things to offer. And I've enjoyed each one of these, and you'll be able to find them online on our YouTube channel. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Good weekend.